The Apple by John Burroughs from Winter Sunshine. Lo, sweetened with the summer light, the full-juiced apple waxing over-mellow, drops in silent autumn night. Tennyson. Not a little of the sunshine of our northern winters is surely wrapped up in the apple. How could we winter over without it? How is life sweetened by its mild acids? A cellar filled with apples is more valuable than a chamber filled with flax and wool. So much sound, ruddy life to draw upon, to strike one's roots down into it, as it were. Especially to those whose soil of life is inclined to be a little clayey and heavy, is the apple a winter necessity. It is the natural antidote of most of the ills the flesh is heir to. Full of vegetable acids and aromatics, qualities which act as refrigerants and antiseptics, what an enemy it is to jaundice, indigestion, torpidity of liver, etc. It is a gentle spur and tonic to the whole biliary system. Then I have read that it has been found by analysis to contain more phosphorus than any other vegetable. This makes it the proper food of the scholar and the sedentary man. It feeds his brain and it stimulates his liver. Neither is this all. Besides its hygienic properties, the apple is full of sugar and its mucilage, which makes it highly nutritious. It is the operators of Cornwall, England, consider ripe apples nearly as nourishing as bread, and far more so than potatoes. In the year 1801, which was a year of much scarcity, apples, instead of being converted into cider, were sold to the poor, and the laborers asserted that they could stand their work on baked apples without meat, whereas a potato diet required either meat or some other substantial nutriment. The French and Germans used apples extensively. So do the inhabitants of all European nations. The laborers depend upon them as an article of food, and frequently make a dinner of sliced apples and bread. Yet the English apple is a tame and insipid affair compared with the intense, sun-colored, and sun-steeped fruit our orchards yield. The English have no sweet apple, I am told, the saccharine element apparently being less abundant in vegetable nature in that sour and chilly climate than in our own. It is well known that the European maple yields no sugar, while both our birch and hickory have sweet in their veins. Perhaps this fact accounts for our excessive love of sweets, which may be said to be a national trait. The Russian apple has a lovely complexion, smooth and transparent, but the Cossack is not yet all eliminated from it. The only one I have seen, the Duchess of Oldenburg, is as beautiful as a Tartar princess, with a distracting odor, but it is the least puckery to the taste. The best thing I know about Chile is not its guano beans, but this fact, which I learned from Darwin's voyage, namely that the apple thrives well there. Darwin saw a town there so completely buried in a wood of apple trees that its streets were merely paths in an orchard. The tree indeed thrives so well that large branches cut off in the spring and planted 2 or 3 feet deep in the ground send out roots and develop into fine, full-bearing trees by the 3rd year. The people know the value of the apple too. They make cider and wine of it, and then from the refuse a white and finely flavored spirit. Then by another process, a sweet treacle is obtained called honey. The children and pigs ate little or no food. He does not add that the people are healthy and temperate, but I have no doubt they are. We knew the apple had many virtues, but these Chileans have really opened a deep beneath a deep. We had found out the cider and the spirits, but who guessed the wine and the honey except it were the bees? There is a variety in our orchards called the wine sap, a doubly liquid name that suggests what might be done with this fruit. The apple is the commonest, yet the most varied and beautiful of fruits. A dish of them is as becoming to the center table in winter as was the vase of flowers in the summer. a bouquet of Spitzenbergs and Greenings and Northern Spies. A rose when it blooms, the apple is a rose when it ripens. It pleases every sense to which it can be addressed, the touch, the smell, the sight, the taste, and when it falls in the still October days, it pleases the ear. It is a call to a banquet. It is a signal that the feast is ready. The bough would fain hold it, but it can now assert its independence. It can now live a life of its own. Daily the stem relaxes its hold, till finally it lets go completely, and down comes the painted sphere with a mellow thump to the ground, toward which it has been nodding so long. It bounds away to seek its bed, to hide under a leaf or in a tuft of grass. It will now take time to meditate and ripen. What delicious thoughts it has there nestled with its fellows under the fence, turning acid into sugar and sugar into wine. How pleasing to the touch! I love to stroke its polished rondure with my hand, to carry it in my pocket on my tramp over the winter hills or through the early spring woods. You are company. You are you red-cheeked spitz, or your salmon-fleshed greening. I toy with you, press your face to mine, toss you in the air, roll you on the ground, see you shine out where you lie amid the moss and dry leaves and sticks. You are so alive. You glow like a ruddy flower. You look so animated. I almost expect to see you move. I postpone the eating of you. You are so beautiful. How compact, how exquisitely tinted, stained by the sun and varnished against the rains. An independent vegetable existence. Alive and vascular as my own flesh, capable of being wounded, bleeding, wasting away, or almost repairing damages. How they resist the cold, holding out almost as long as the red cheeks of the boys do. A frost that destroys the potatoes and other roots only make the apple more crisp and vigorous. They peep out from the chance November shows unscathed. When I see the fruit vendor in the street corner stamping his feet and beating his hands to keep them warm, and his naked apples lying exposed to the blasts, I wonder if they do not ache too to clap their hands and enliven their circulation, but they can stand it nearly as long as the vendor can. Noble common fruit, best friend of man and most loved by him, following him like his dog or his cow wherever he goes. His homestead is not planted till you are planted. Your roots intertwine with his, thriving best where he thrives best, loving the limestone and the frost, the plow and the pruning knife. You are indeed suggestive of hardy, cheerful industry and a healthy life in the open air. Temperate, chaste fruit, you mean neither luxury nor sloth, neither satiety nor indolence, neither enervating heats nor the frigid zones, uncloying fruit. Fruit whose best sauce is the open air, whose finest flavors only he whose taste is sharpened by brisk work or walking knows. Winter fruit, when the fire of life burns brightest. Fruit always a little hyperborean, leaning toward the cold, bracing subacid, active fruit. I think you must come from the north. You are so frank and honest, so sturdy and appetizing. You are stocky and homely like the northern races. Your quality is Saxon. Surely the fiery and impetuous south is not akin to thee, nor not spices or olives or the sumptuous liquid fruits, but the grass, the snow, the grains, the coolness is akin to thee. I think if I could subsist on you or the like of you, I should never have an intemperate or ignoble thought, never be feverish or despondent. So far as I could absorb or transmute your quality, I should be cheerful, continent, equitable, sweet-blooded, long-lived, and should shed warmth and contentment around. Is there any other fruit that has so much facial expression as the apple? What boy does not more than a half believe they can see with a single eye of theirs? Do they not look and nod to him from the bough? The Swar has one look, the Rambo another, the Spy another. The youth recognizes the Seek no further, buried beneath a dozen or other varieties, the moment he catches a glance of its eye, or the bonny-cheeked Newton pippin, or the gentle but sharp-nosed gillyflower. He goes to the great bin in the cellar and sinks his shaft there, in the garnered wealth of the orchards, mining for his favorites, sometimes coming plump upon them, sometimes catching a glimpse of them to the right or left, or in covering them as keystones in an arch made up of many varieties. In the dark he can usually tell them by the sense of touch. There is not only the size and shape, but there is the texture and polish. Some apples are coarse-grained and some are fine. Some are thin-skinned and some are thick. One variety is quick and vigorous beneath the touch, another gentle and yielding. The pinnock has a thick skin with a spongy lining. A bruise in it becomes like a piece of cork. The tallow apple has an unctuous feel, as its name suggests. It sheds water like a duck. What apple is that with a fat curved stem that blends so prettily with its own flesh? The wine apple. Some varieties impress me as masculine, weather-stained, freckled, lasting, and rugged. Others are indeed lady apples, fair, delicate, shining, mild-flavored, white-meated like the egg drop and ladyfinger. The practiced hand knows each kind by the touch. Do you remember the apple hole in the garden or the back of the house, Ben Bolt? In the fall, after the bins in the cellar have been well stocked, we excavated a circular pit in the warm, mellow earth, and covering the bottom with clean rye straw, emptied in a basketful after basketful of hardy, choice varieties, till there was a tent-shaped mound several feet high of shining, variegated fruit. Then, wrapping it about with a thick layer of long rye straw, and tucking it up snug and warm, the mound was covered with a thin coating of earth, a flat stone on the top holding down the straw. As winter set in, another coating of earth was put upon it, with perhaps an overcoat of coarse, dry, stable manure, and the precious pile was left in silence and darkness till spring. No marmot hibernating underground in his nest of leaves and dry grass, more cozy and warm. No frost, no wet, but fragrant privacy and quiet. Then how the earth tempers and flavors the apples. It draws out all the acrid, unripe qualities and infuses into them a subtle, refreshing taste of the soil. Some varieties perish, but the ranker, hardier kinds, like the northern spy, the greening or the black apple, or the russet or the pinnock, how they ripen and grow in grace, how the green becomes gold and the bitter becomes sweet. As the supply in the bins and barrels gets low and spring approaches, the buried treasure in the garden are remembered. With spade and axe we go out and penetrate through the snow and frozen earth till the inner dressings of straw is laid bare. It is not quite as clear and bright as when we placed it there last fall, but the fruit beneath, which the hand soon exposes, is just as bright and far more luscious. Then, as day after day you resort to the hole, and removing the straw and earth from the opening thrust your arm into the fragrant pit, you have a better chance than ever before to become acquainted with your favorites by the sense of touch, how you feel for them, reaching to the right and left. Now you have a Talman sweet, you imagine you can feel that single meridian line that divides it into two hemispheres. Now a greening fills your hand, you feel its fine quality beneath its rough coat. Now you have hooked a swar, you recognize its full face. Now a Vanderveer or a king rolls down from the apex above, and you bag it at once. When you were a schoolboy, you stowed these away in your pockets and ate them along the road and at recess and again at noontime, and then in a measure you corrected the effects of the cake and pie with which your indulgent mother filled your lunch basket. The boy is indeed the true apple eater, and is not to be questioned how he came by the fruit with which his pockets are filled. It belongs to him, and he may steal it if it cannot be had in any other way. His own juicy flesh caves the juicy flesh of the apple. Sap draws sap. His fruit eating has little reference to the state of his appetite. Whether he be full of meat or empty of meat, he wants the apple just the same. Before meal or after meal, it never comes amiss. The farm boy munches apples all day long. He has nests of them in the haymow, mellowing to which he makes frequent visits. Sometimes old Brindle, having access through the open door, smells them out and makes short work of them. In some countries the custom remains of placing a rosy apple in the hand of the dead, that they may find it when they enter paradise. In northern mythology the giants eat apples to keep off old age. The apple is indeed the fruit of youth. As we grow old, we crave apples less. It is an ominous sign. When you are ashamed to be seen eating them on the street, when you can carry them in your pocket and your hand not constantly find its way to them, when your neighbor has apples and you have none, and you make no nocturnal visits to his orchard when your lunch basket is without them, and you can pass a winter's night by your fireside with no thought of the fruit at your elbow, then be assured you are no longer a boy either in heart or in years. The genuine apple eater comforts himself with an apple in their season as others do, others with a pipe or cigar. When he has nothing else to do or is bored, he eats an apple. While he is waiting for the train, he eats an apple, sometimes several of them. When he takes a walk, he arms himself with apples. His traveling bag is full of apples. He offers an apple to his companion and takes one himself. They are his chief solace when on the road. He sows their seed along the road. He tosses the core from the car window and from the top of the stagecoach. He would in time make the land one vast orchard. He dispenses with a knife. He prefers that his teeth shall have the first taste. Then he knows the best flavor is immediately beneath the skin, and that is in a pared apple this is lost. If you will stew the apple, he says, instead of baking it, by all means leave the skin on. It improves the color and vastly heightens the flavor of the dish. The apple is a masculine fruit, hence women are poor apple eaters. It belongs to the open air and requires an open air taste and relish. I instantly sympathize with that clergyman I read of who, on pulling out his pocket handkerchief, in the midst of his discourse, pulled out 2 bouncing apples with it that went rolling across the pulpit floor and down the pulpit stairs. These apples were no doubt to be eaten after the sermon on his way home or to his next appointment. They would take the taste of it out of his mouth. Then would a minister be apt to grow tiresome with 2 big apples in his coat-tail pockets? Would he not naturally hasten along to lastly and the big apples? If they were the dominant apples and it was April or May, he certainly would. How the early settlers prized the apple! When their trees broke down or were split asunder by the storms, the neighbors turned out. The divided tree was put together again and fastened with iron bolts. In some of the oldest orchards one may still occasionally see a large dilapidated tree with the rusty iron bolt yet visible. Poor sour fruit too, but sweet in those early pioneer days. My grandfather, who was one of these heroes of the stump, used every fall to make a journey of 40 miles for a few apples, which he brought home in a bag on horseback. He frequently started from home by 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and at one time both himself and his horse were much frightened by the screaming of panthers in a narrow pass in the mountains through which the road led. Emerson, I believe, has spoken of the apple as the social fruit of New England. Indeed, what a promoter or a better of social intercourse among our rural population the apple has become. The company, growing more merry and unrestrained as soon as the basket of apples was passed around. When the cider followed, the introduction and good understanding were complete. Then those rural gatherings that enlivened the autumn in the country known as apple cuts, now, alas, nearly obsolete, where so many things were cut and dried besides apples. The larger and more loaded with the orchard, the more frequently the invitations went round, and the higher the social and convivial spirit ran. Ours is eminently a country of the orchard. Horace Greeley said he had seen no land in which the orchard formed such a prominent feature in the rural and agricultural districts. Nearly every farmhouse in the eastern and northern states has its setting or its background of apple trees which generally date back to the first settlement of the farm. Indeed, the orchard, more than almost any other thing, tends to soften and humanize the country and give the place of which it is an adjunct a settled domestic look. The apple tree takes the rawness and wildness off any scene. On the top of a mountain or in remote pastures, it sheds the sentiment of home. It never loses its domestic air or lapses into a wild state. And in planting a homestead or in choosing the building site for the new house, what a help it is to have a few old maternal apple trees nearby, regular old grandmothers who have seen trouble, who have been sad and glad through so many winters and summers, who have blossomed till the air about them is sweeter than elsewhere, and borne fruit till the grass beneath them has become thick and soft from human contact, and who have nourished robins and finches in their branches till they have a tender, brooding look. The ground, the turf, the atmosphere of an old orchard seems several stages nearer to man than that of the adjoining field, as if the trees had given back to the soil more than they had taken from it, as if they had tempered the elements and attracted all the genial and beneficent influences in the landscape around. An apple orchard is sure to bear you several crops beside the apple. There is the crop of sweet and tender reminiscences, dating from childhood and spanning the seasons from May to October, and making the orchard a sort of outlying part of the household. You have played there as a child, mused there as a youth or lover, strolled there as a thoughtful, sad-eyed man. Your father, perhaps, planted the trees or reared them from the seed, and you yourself have pruned and grafted them, and worked among them, till every separate tree has a peculiar history and meaning in your mind. Then there is the never-failing crop of birds, robins, goldfinches, kingbirds, cedar birds, harebirds, orioles, starlings, all nesting and breeding in its branches, and fitly described by Wilson Flagg as birds of the garden and orchard. Whether the pippin and sweet bough bear or not, the punctual birds can always be depended upon. Indeed, there are few better places to study ornithology than in the orchard. Besides its regular occupants, many of the birds of the deeper forest find occasion to visit it during the season. The cuckoo comes from the tent caterpillar, the jay for frozen apples, the ruffled grouse for buds, the crow foraging for birds' eggs, the woodpecker and chickadees for their food, and the high-hole for ants. The redbird comes too, if only to see what a friendly covert its branches form, and the wood thrush now and then comes out of the grove near by and nests alongside of its cousin, the robin. The smaller hawks know that this is a most likely spot for their prey, and in spring the shy northern warblers may be studied as they pause to feed on the fine insects amid its branches. The mice love to dwell here also, and hither come from the near woods to the squirrel and the rabbit. The latter will put his head through the boy's slipper noose any time for a taste of the sweet apple, and the red squirrel and chipmunk esteem its seeds a great rarity. All the domestic animals love the apple, but none so much as the cow. The taste of it wakes her up as few other things do, and bars and fences must be well looked after. No need to assort them or pick out the ripe ones for her. An apple is an apple, and there is no best about it. I heard of a quick-witted old cow that learned to shake them down from the tree. While rubbing herself, she had observed that an apple sometimes fell. This stimulated her to rub a little harder, when more apples fell. She then took the hint and rubbed her shoulder with such vigor that the farmer had to check her and keep an eye on her to save his fruit. But the cow is the friend of the apple. How many trees she has planted about the farm, in the edge of the woods, and in remote fields and pastures. The wild apples, celebrated by Thoreau, are mostly of her planting. She browses them down, to be sure, but they are hers, and why should she not? What an individuality the apple tree has, each variety being nearly as marked by its own form as by its fruit. What a vigorous grower, for instance, is the Ribston pippin, an English apple, wide branching like the oak. Its large, ridgy fruit in late fall or early winter is one of my favorites, or the thick and more pendant top of the bellflower, with its equally rich, sprightly, uncloying fruit. Sweet apples are perhaps the most nutritious, and when baked are a feast of themselves. With the tree of the Jersey sweet or of the Talmon sweet in bearing, no man's table need be devoid of luxuries, and one of the most wholesome of all desserts. Or the red astrakhan, an August apple. What a gap may be filled in the culinary department of a household at this season by a single tree of this fruit! And what a feast in its shining crimson coat to the eye before its snow-white flesh has reached the tongue. But the apple of apples for the household is the Spitzenberg. In the casket, Pomona has put her highest flavors. It can stand the ordeal of cooking and still remain a Spitz. I recently saw a barrel of these apples from the orchard of a fruit grower in the northern part of New York who has devoted especial attention to this variety. They were perfect gems, not large that had been the aim, but small, fair, uniform, and red to the core. How intense, how spicy and aromatic! But all the excellences of the apple are not confined to the cultivated fruit. Occasionally a seedling springs up about the farm that produces fruit of rare beauty and worth. In sections peculiarly adapted to the apple, like a certain belt along the Hudson River, I have noticed that most of the wild, unbidden trees bear good, edible fruit. In cold and ungenial districts, the seedlings are mostly sour and crab, but in more favorable soils they are oftener mild and sweet. I know wild apples that ripen in August and that do not need, if it could be had, the rose sauce of sharp November air to be eaten with. At the foot of a hill near me and striking its roots deep in the shale is a giant specimen of native tree that bears an apple that has grown about the clearest, waxiest, most transparent complexion I ever saw. It is a good size and the color of a tea rose. Its quality is best appreciated in the kitchen. I know another seedling of excellent quality and so remarkable for its firmness and density that it is known on the farm where it grows as the heavy apple. I have alluded to Thoreau, to whom all lovers of the apple and its tree are under obligation. His chapter on wild apples is a most delicious piece of writing. It has a tang and smack like the fruit it celebrates, and is dashed and streaked with coloring in the same manner. It has the hue and perfume of the crab and the richness and raciness of the pippin. But Thoreau loved other apples than the wild sorts, and was obliged to confess that his favorites could not be eaten indoors. Late in November he found a blue pearmain tree growing within the edge of a swamp, almost as good as wild. You would not suppose, he says, that there was any fruit left there on the first survey, but you must look according to system. Those which lie exposed are quite brown and rotten now, or perchance a few still show one blooming cheek here and there amid the wet leaves. Nevertheless, with experienced eyes that explore amid the bare alders and the huckleberry bushes and the withered sedge and the crevices of the rocks which are full of leaves, and pry under the fallen and decaying ferns which apple and alder leaves thickly strew the ground. For I know that they lie concealed, fallen into hollows long since, covered up by the leaves of the tree itself, a proper kind of packing. From these lurking places, anywhere within the circumference of the tree, I draw forth the fruit all wet and glossy, may be nibbled by rabbits and hollowed out by crickets, and perhaps with a leaf or two cemented to it as Curzon, an old manuscript of a monastery's moldy cellar, but still with a rich bloom on it, and at least as ripe and well kept, if not better than those in barrels, more crisp and lively than they. If these resources fail to yield anything, I have learned to look between the bases of the suckers which spring thickly from some horizontal limb, for now and then one lodges there, or in the very midst of an alder clump, where they are covered by leaves, safe from cows which may have smelled them out. If I am sharp set, for I do not refuse the blue pearmain, I fill my pockets on each side, and I retrace my steps in the frosty eve. Being perhaps 4 or 5 miles from home, I eat one first from this side, and then from that, to keep my balance.